You want to learn a new language, but you're overwhelmed with choice. The digital language learning industry was valued in 2022 at $14.5 billion US, and there were some big players looking to cash in on that opportunity. It might seem like a good deal. In exchange for money, these companies provide a service for learners to attain their goal of learning a new language. But is it that simple? I'm going to show you the problems that using these apps can cause and how you can avoid wasting your time and money. But in order to do that, there is a key point that you need to understand. Without this, you could be approaching learning wrong and you might fall for some of the slick marketing that these companies have. When you're using your native language, you don't have to think about it, at least not too much. You instantly understand the words that you hear and you don't have to think about the grammar for any sentences that you use. You've created a network in your head of all of the words and grammar that you know, and it's all linked together in a way that just lets you pull out what you need. This lets you make up different sentences on the spot. You aren't having to pause and think about what you want to say, it's just already there. Now, if we contrast that with memorizing set phrases and repeating them, from the outside, it looks very similar to knowing a language, but it's not quite the same thing as you do in your native language. If you're going on holiday somewhere, it makes total sense to do that in order to get by for a week or so. But there is always the risk that when you ask for directions somewhere, you have no idea what their reply is. So in a way, it does depend on your goal. Do you want to learn a few set phrases, or do you plan to learn the language in the same way that a native speaker does? I've met so many people who've said to me that they're bad at languages, that they'll say they've tried X app and they just felt they were rubbish at it. People often say that anyone who speaks another language has some sort of gift. But if we think about creating this complex network in your head of the information in the language, then the fact that someone is repeatedly failing quizzes on an app, well, that doesn't mean anything at all. So I'm not going to give you a breakdown of every app and the pros and the cons. You're an adult. You can decide what you think of them. But the biggest thing I think we need to be mindful of is the effect of using these different resources on you. If you're less experienced and you believe the marketing telling you that you just have to follow this method to get to fluency, well, when you feel you're not making much progress, you're going to assume that you're the problem. That's when people start to think that they can't learn a language. It can create a dependency on these apps whereby if you try one and you don't see the success you want, you're going to assume you're at fault. Collecting badges on some app on your phone might not be likely to inspire you to continue on your journey, and without consistency over the long term, it's guaranteed you won't make much progress. So sometimes it's not you, it's the app. To get around this, first find something you'd rather do instead, like follow some simple videos on YouTube or some short stories online for beginners. Just focus on letting the brain naturally build up the language in your head. It takes time. Which leads me onto the next point. Sometimes it's not the app, it's you. Have you ever known anyone who's been in a relationship with someone where they argue all the time and you just think, why don't you just leave them? If they're making you unhappy and you don't get on, life's too short. Go and find someone else. Now, I'm not saying give up on the language that you want to learn and go and learn another one. Not at all. But if you're trying a particular resource and it feels like trying to climb Everest in flip-flops, just move on. Strange image, but we'll go with it. Maybe for a complete beginner, it was useful to get yourself started, but no one else is in charge of your learning. Keep looking for material that you're genuinely interested in, and that way you can make your learning sustainable and enjoyable. Have you looked for podcasts for learners of whichever language you're learning? There are actually some really good ones out there. Listening every day to your target language is seriously powerful. Quick sidebar here for people who are using apps on their phones. You might have the perfect app for learning languages, but if you get distracted and you're checking social media half the time, maybe it's time to find another way to learn. So one useful tool for learning a language is ChatGPT. ChatGPT summarized the plot of Die Hard for me, but at a beginner's level of Spanish, and make it quick.
Die Hard trata sobre un policía, John McClane, cuando un grupo de criminales toma control del edificio. John tiene que detener a los criminales y salvar a las personas dentro, incluyendo a su esposa.
But even ChatGPT is missing a key part of language learning. Let me tell you about an experience I had so you understand. So the hands-free function of ChatGPT is actually pretty good. You can literally have a conversation with the bot, and As you can see, you can even ask it to speak at whatever level you are in the language, although it won't slow down how fast it speaks to you, which is annoying if your level isn't that high yet. I was driving home one day and started having a hands-free chat with ChatGPT about España, which is basically the depopulation of rural Spain. Now, for whatever reason, it mentioned a poet, Antonio Machado, who I didn't know, and so I asked ChatGPT. Who is the poet Antonio Machado?
Antonio Machado fue un importante poeta y dramaturgo español, asociado con la generación del 98. Nació en 1875 en Sevilla, España, y es conocido por su poesía profunda y reflexiva, que explora temas como la existencia, el amor y el paisaje español.
Muchísimas gracias.
Me alegra que te haya sido útil.
And whilst that's interesting and everything, it misses a core part of language learning for me. Imagine having a conversation with Wikipedia versus just going to the pub for a pint with a good friend. Wikipedia is interesting, but it's missing the human element at the heart of language learning. I think learning a language is about connecting with people and their culture, so whilst in theory, you don't ever have to pay for a tutor again with ChatGPT, I would much rather find a fun tutor online to talk to. We can have rich conversations where we share stories about our lives and I can learn about another culture whilst also sharing some of my own. Repeating sentences that you're supposed to memorize just doesn't sound as fun to me. I'm learning Spanish at the minute and occasionally I've doubted myself and I thought maybe I should do something that feels more like a lot of effort, as if things feeling difficult is the way that you learn a language, which it totally isn't, by the way. Anyway, perhaps I should do something intensive that feels like hard work to really try and pick up the language. And then I look over at my iPad and I've got an absolute mountain of amazing books that I'm working my way through. On one hand, I could use some sentence mining app and I could smash through hundreds of isolated sentences in order to try and master the Spanish subjunctive. And let's be honest, probably not enjoy the process. And what's more, it also might not work. Or I could read a book about an inquisitor hunting heretics in a far future. I'll go for the last one every day of the week. You can read something else, by the way. You get the point. There is an opportunity cost in whatever you do. We know that being exposed to language at a level that you can understand helps you to pick up the language without you having to try. And reading is a fantastic way to pick up grammar and vocabulary. So I can find enjoyable things to do without having to force myself to go through another uninspiring lesson on yet another app. Now, I don't like to be a big naysayer, and I can already see the comment section now. I actually think Duolingo is really good. I like to be positive, and there are things that apps can do for you. They can get you started. You've got to start somewhere, right? They're not your only option though. They can help you to build the daily habit, which is ultimately the key to learning any language. You're not going to get fluent on 15 minutes of Duolingo a month. They can help you understand if you actually want to learn a new language. Like the first couple of days, it might seem novel, but is this something you really want to stick with before you spend too much money? And they can help you interact with people in a limited way. You're going on holiday, and of course you need to know where is the nearest cat cafe. With learning a language, you need to play the long game and keep it sustainable. You're in charge of your learning, and so if you're not seeing the results that you want, maybe it's time for a change. Without the right habits to put this into practice, you are setting yourself up to fail. This next video here will explain the next step that will help you get towards fluency in whichever language you're learning.